Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 conference. I'm your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I am just so pleased to be speaking with Jesse Hanson. Jesse holds a PhD in clinical psychology, specializing in neuroscience, somatic or body-centered psychology, and holistic healing. Trained in EMDR and other forms of somatic therapies, Jesse helps clients release held trauma and negative emotions from the body and inspires them to create themselves anew. After more than 10 years in the holistic health field and many years of working with a multifaceted treatment team approach at Passages Malibu, Jesse now brings his experience to the Helix Healthcare Group as Clinical Director of Integrative Approach to Treating Addiction, Trauma, and Mental Health Issues. Jesse also leads clinical research studies at Helix Healthcare that investigate holistic and natural ways of reducing stress and anxiety. He recently completed research with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology on the impact of music therapy on mood. Jesse, welcome to the Recovery 2.0 conference.
Thank you so much, Tommy. I'm so grateful and honored to be part of this. And I just also want to name quickly as we start that, I actually witnessed you launch this a number of years ago, and I'm just so touched and honored by your work and your dedication to it. And I know that this is changing people's lives all over the planet. So much respect to you, man. Much respect.
Thank you so much. So, Jesse, you're involved in so many things that I want to get into today. Can you tell me a little bit about your path to doing this kind of work?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. Basically, I was a traditional kind of what I call sleepwalker, just doing what I should, doing what's culturally prescribed all the way through. In college and undergrad, I got into philosophy, which helped me start to open my mind a bit, but I still wasn't connected to my body at all. In fact, I hated it. I thought it was annoying that I had to do things like eat and go to the bathroom and all these if I just didn't have to do those, right?
Yes, if only.
If only. And then really, as I know, is the vehicle for a lot of us that are in the continual process of awakening. I was hit with a number of challenges, namely finding out my ex-wife was having an affair. My father passed away, and a friend betrayed me in a business that we had started, all in the same 6-month period. And I basically did what a lot of us would do. I turned to drugs and alcohol to cope, to deal, to get through. I feel blessed that within a couple of years of that, I ended up working with a Native American teacher as well as some psychotherapy, and slowly but surely dug myself out of that hole, and first started with actually becoming a body worker. And in Venice Beach, I started a place called Zen Den Venice, and it was really then when I started to face the fears I had around my own body, and that was everything from yoga to meditation to conscious healing touch. And from there, it helped me realize that the body is the vehicle to connect to, is one of the vehicles to connect to the psyche and the soul. And that's then around age 28 is when I got into the neuropsychology field, the body-centered psychotherapy field. And here I am now integrating all of it together up here in Toronto.
I've got this theory that all addiction in some way, shape, or form is coming from a trauma of some kind.
That's the first point on my little self-made document here.
I'd love you to talk about trauma. It's something it's so replete in our world. Everybody that I speak to, looking back on my own history, all the folks I've ever communicated with within 12-step circles, other people who were not in 12-step circles but who were struggling badly with addiction, addictive issues, coming from some kind of trauma, not necessarily an enormous one, but a trauma nonetheless. So let's get on to this point.
Great, yeah, it's a perfect place to start, Tommy. And like you said, not even an enormous one. I think that's the key of what I got from what you said, is that trauma is still commonly misunderstood. And I love the neuroscientific definition of it. It's simply when the nervous system is dysregulated. That's trauma in the body from a pure scientific perspective. Now, the degree, the magnitude, the long-lasting effects, that there's a whole other conversation around that. But one way I like to start this conversation is dispelling a myth about trauma, which is that trauma is a noun. That's the myth. And by that, I mean people will tell me, oh, because I was beaten as a kid, or because my dad abandoned us, or whatever it is. Now, of course, my heart goes out, and that is an awful thing. But in the shifting of lens from trauma as a noun, we move it to the idea of trauma as a phenomenon, trauma as a experience that is had by a human being or an animal, any sentient being, that it's about my relationship with the potential traumatic event. Right? In other words, if I expand my window of tolerance and I expand my ability to cope with things, I will not get PTSD or hold on to trauma the same way that someone who doesn't have those skills.
Thank you so much. I'm looking back on my own experience at a traumatic event. This is something I don't normally share, but seems appropriate here. When I was about 5 years old, I was in a movie theater with my father. And I distinctly remember it was the first time he ever let me go to the bathroom by myself in a public place. And as fate would have it, I was actually abused in that bathroom in that moment.
Wow.
Now, when I didn't understand what had happened, and I had no trauma around it. I had no understanding of it. And I innocently went back and I told my father what had happened. Well, you can imagine, my father came completely unglued and grabbed me, took me out, started yelling at the people who worked there, trying to find this person who had done this thing. And I then felt trauma. I then felt shame, but I had no idea. And God bless my father. Any parent would have had a hard time dealing with something like that. But it was interesting. It wasn't necessarily the event itself that went into my body, but it was my father's terror and reaction that I took on. It was just like, oh my God, something just happened. Something terrible has just happened. And does that make any sense to you?
It does, man. I mean, first of all, compassion to little Tommy for that.
Oh yeah.
Experience, both in the bathroom and with Dad. And
sure.
And you bring up a great point, which is also now what we're looking a lot in the field of neuroscience is. It's the relationship. It's the way that I relate to what has happened. And initially, little Tommy was confused, but overall okay. And probably had he been able to have a safe chance to just talk about it, could have moved through it pretty quickly. But because of the reaction, do we lose me?
No, we're here.
Because of the reaction from Dad, which again I understand where he's coming from 100%. But then so in other words, for you and for any of us. It's one part is the actual event, the traumatic event, and then the other part is how is it dealt with? And a lot of that has to do with our loved ones or people that we would first open up about. Another sad but true example, similar to yours, but the opposite response is a child finally disclosing something like that about a sexual abuse or a physical abuse, and then the parents saying, oh, you're just making that up, or I could never believe that Uncle Johnny would do that, or whatever. That becomes equally, if not a greater trauma than the actual event itself. One of the ways we talk about it quickly and easily is big T and small t. I believe this is getting a little more common. Big T trauma being what is most commonly thought of as trauma, your overt traumas, what happened to you in the bathroom would count, but sexual assaults, physical assaults. Little T trauma is the other way to call it, is developmental trauma. And that's actually what we're noticing now is just as devastating to the nervous system as big T traumas, especially when the little t traumas are repeated over and over again, such as neglect, controlling parents, controlling schools, teachers, religions, organizations, whatever it is. Just imagine it for a second. I mean, we all know it in some way. It's like a constant pressure of, I need to perform, or I'm not good enough. That wears on your adrenal glands, that wears on every system in your body to the point where now I'm 30 or 40 years old and I need blood pressure medication, and I think it's because something's wrong with my heart. And that's another point. Just keep me on whatever rails you're interested in, but is that I do think there's a lot of what we deal with at Helix Healthcare Group here in Toronto is people being misdiagnosed, medical doctors not understanding trauma and giving people anything from prescriptions to labels that keep the client or the patient ignorant to the reality of what's actually happening to them, and they walk out thinking they've really got bipolar or they've got heart disease, when really they just need to heal some trauma and these symptoms will go away.
Yes. I want to stay on this for just a moment. The body as a system is designed in such a way as to, survive. Like the main directive is survive, take care of itself. And I think the body's intelligence is geared towards creating balance, finding homeostasis in the body and mind.
Yes.
And when we have trauma, And then let's say we move into, well, there are many ways to deal with it. Repression is one way that people deal with trauma. Addiction or adapting through the use of drugs and alcohol to the dysregulation you spoke of earlier.
Which is really just a fancy way of numbing it out or repressing it. It's an assisted way.
Yes, assisted way. Thank you very much. And then there are other ways like, anger, acting out sexually. There's a variety of human ways that we deal with discomfort and dysregulation. The body, though, underneath it all, is still on its main directive: survive and find balance. But when we get into addiction, at least, and some of these other ways of coping, these maladaptive tendencies, it seems as if we are either going directly against the main directive, or the body in some way is so tilted that the body is actually going against itself, almost like an autoimmune disease of the soul in a way.
Right.
Do you see it like that?
I do, Tommy. I appreciate your naming that, and that's actually the main goal that I work with when I work with clients and when I'm training my team, is that when we can hold create a certain container of safety and non-judgment, there is a natural healing process that is waiting to happen. And all the ways that we get in the way of it, that has to do with our ego, that has to do with the cultural, religious, family of origin-based imprints that say, man up, woman up, whatever it is, perform. Then we use our ego and our psyche, our mind, to override and suppress the body trying to heal. And I'll tell you one big reason why is, especially with trauma, and the uglier the trauma, the more true this is. The clinical term for it's called sequencing, Tommy. Sequencing is allowing the suppressed impulses to find a way out. And I know you are a practitioner of Kundalini Yoga. That's a wonderful way to do it in a more contained way. But a lot of the trauma release work we do, creating a space for someone where really they just need to shake their whole body and maybe push, maybe squeeze, whatever it is. I don't know. They don't know until it happens. And those impulses, when they are not expressed, that's what's really causing all the imbalances, all the dysfunction, right? And that's the product of our shouldhood, as I call it, the shouldhood, saying what we should do and shouldn't. So it is very much like a natural healing that wants to happen underneath, but our shouldhood and our ego keeps it all in. And that's the way I see my role as a trauma specialist is to help people learn about this first and foremost, and then create safe and sacred spaces for them to be able to get those sequence those impulses out of their body, and then the healing happens.
Well, what you're saying makes 1,000% sense to me, and I'm feeling that we are living in a society where what you just laid out there, people who need science, proof, white papers, peer-reviewed science, are going to fight people like you and me, because what you just stated is, it sounds to a person who equates medicine with a pill, all of the alternative therapy universe becomes suspect.
Right.
So I feel like we're up against a lot, and I think that's part of why when people are dealing with trauma or they're coming into a psychotherapeutic environment, the first thought for many practitioners who live in that world of medicine equals drug equals pill, they're going to get prescribed something. I'd love to understand sort of what you're seeing when people end up in your office, and maybe they're on medication and want to get off, or are not yet aware that they could get off, that it's possible for them to get off of medication. Let's talk about that whole sort of pharmacological world.
Yeah, no, great. I want to speak to your first point too as well, Tommy, is I think it's a huge one, and that's part of why I was so excited and said yes right away when you invited me, is I really see that you've developed a format here through Recovery 2.0 that does have legitimacy and respect, and is making an imprint globally on how addiction's perceived. And around what you say, first of all, the exciting part right now, and why I'm so grateful, there are not many doctors of neuropsychology out there yet, and especially that I got, if you remember, I actually used to live in LA, and I was part of the community that you're very much a part of, and I love that. And yet there's a lot of speaking to the choir that goes on. There's a lot of, we've got a great little hub here, and it's all, synergistic there, but take that into a clinical world, you don't stand a chance, right? So I'm so grateful, and in fact, that's the main reason that I finished my PhD, was because I wanted to be able to represent this clinically. And the exciting part is that now, and UCLA actually has every year, they have a conference called the Interpersonal Psychoneurobiology Conference. And we are in a time now, and yes, it's more on the West Coast than anywhere else, but it's starting to diffuse. We're here in Toronto now on the East Coast, that the science is there. And anyone that you're going to meet who would push back on this, it simply means they haven't read the most recent science yet. They're still going from 50 to 100 years ago. And that's okay. It takes time for people to wake up. And so I call myself bilingual. I can speak the alternative language. I can also speak the clinical language.
I love it. I love it.
I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but in short, it is. It's all right there in science now. Everything I've talked about, the sequencing, the way that muscular contraction impinges the human nervous system to not allow the free flow of energy, blood, neurological activity, cerebrospinal fluid, whatever you want to call it. That's what creates these imbalances, these dysfunctions, where people then become susceptible to going to the bottle, to the pills, to shopping, sex, whatever it is. It's not that they really have this thunderbolt hit them and they now have a disease. It's that they haven't learned how to regulate their body and mind together, right? So long story short, and this is actually, you mentioned about research in the beginning when you introduced me, we are now starting on a project. We have now live EEG neurofeedback in our center, and we're starting to be able to give people feedback neurologically to show them what happens when they think about or engage with the traumatic past memories. We're now in a position, even at our somewhat small center in Toronto here, that we can actually provide neuroscientific evidence and hard science to our clients in live real time to show them what happens to their brain when they go into trauma versus using some of the mindfulness skills that we're teaching them, right? So it is shifting, and I feel like even in the next 5 to 10 years, gentlemen like you and I are going to be on the forefront of helping, wake up and train other health professionals, the general public about this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a dream. That's absolutely a dream, and I hope so. Usually I'm just considered to be basically a freak. So any movement towards there's actually some real acceptable, modalities here that are healing people around the world. If I can get people to really look at this stuff, then that would be a dream come true, And we've got, something like 30,000 people watching our conference, so that's a good trend in the right direction. So. But so you spoke about contraction of the body, the causing stuckness and energy, blockages, if you will, blood and what we in yoga would call prana, or in Chinese medicine they might call qi.
Yeah.
What is the process that you see by which one can come back from traumatic experience, from carrying trauma in the body? Where does it begin? Take me through what your work is like.
Okay, great, thank you. Definitely integration is the word that comes up as soon as I hear you ask that question, and by that I mean integrating not just yoga, not just meditation, not just psychotherapy, not just naturopathic medicine, or not just pharmacological medicines. It's the combination and integration of all of it. So what we're doing at Helix, the common flow where we're seeing significant shifts for people who come to us with severe trauma, is that they do usually a 2-hour somatic process that could be EMDR, sensory motor psychotherapy, relational somatic therapies. We have about 4 or 5 different modalities. In that time, Tommy, it's not talk therapy. They're being invited to notice and sequence out the energy that's in their body. The more that this person is in tune with their body through yoga or meditation, the quicker, the more effective, the more graceful the work can go. So if I'm working with somebody and it's just, we're not getting there how I'd like, I will say, you know what, you need to go do a little bit more yoga, meditation, get it more connected with yourself that way, then watch what will happen, that the work will deepen very quickly. As soon as that session ends, they'd be walked down the hall and go into an integrative sound therapy, acupuncture, qigong session where that practitioner is trained to work with trauma as well and helps them right then when their nervous system is malleable and in that neuroplasticity place, then they can integrate that work very gracefully. And so by the time they leave, because we are an outpatient, we work with people in their daily lives, that they're grounded, they're integrated, they know they've been on a journey, but they're not walking around open and wounded.
Yes.
So it's really being able to, first of all, have our own skills and awareness. And, I humbly admit, only reason I know how to do what I do is because I've done this work and continue to do this work for myself around my own traumas. And that's really what opens the gateway, which is the number one reason I believe why most health professionals don't really know how to diagnose, know the symptoms or know how to treat it, is because the traditional way is very much me doctor, you patient, me fix you, you stay in the trenches, I stay in the white suit, never the two shall cross.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm again thinking back on my own experience. When I put down drugs and alcohol, though I didn't realize it at the time, I was still walking around in what I call the frequency of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of saying that would be I was walking around with a body full of trauma.
Yeah.
And it would be many years before I would understand what was happening. The outward experience, the behavioral experience was I was engaging in other addictive behaviors for the same reasons I engaged in the original addictive behaviors.
Right.
So I was stuck with a lot of sadness and hardship with regards to something in the past. And for me, as you mentioned, Kundalini Yoga was a big part of me unraveling that mystery.
Yeah.
Nikki Myers, a dear friend of mine and another Recovery 2.0 presenter, says we have to get the issues out of our tissues. And I think that for me, while it was Kundalini Yoga and athletics and all this other stuff, for other people it might be EMDR, it might be somatic-based therapy. But no matter what the theory is, and that theory's been played out for us, the theory is there is a very physical, very real, energetic presence in our body left over from past experience that has not been properly processed through. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's stagnant energy, stagnant chi, repeated negative neural networks, if we want to go bilingual here.
Yep.
It's a way in which the nervous system has been imprinted from previous experiences to respond a certain way to basically threat or pain or the threat of pain. And, I'm just referencing here a little bit of the reminders I'd written myself. Another way to speak to what you're saying in Kundalini Yoga as the vehicle for you, it's important to be sensitive and compassionate. And you and I both know with our histories, if I'm going to somebody and I'm walking around with all those wounds wide open and this person say, hey, Tommy, just come on into your body, buddy. It's going to be great. As soon as you take one breath inwards, it's like, holy crap, I don't want to go there. That's where I've been, storehousing everything I don't want to deal with.
Yes.
So there has to be a sensitivity to that. And I think it's great, like you said, for Kundalini Yoga for you, it's going to be different for everyone. But oftentimes a more gentle bridge being built in before you actually start the deeper trauma reprocessing work, such as EMDR, that's a more conscious way to work with it and avoids re-traumatization or opening those wounds wider accidentally, even with the intention to help.
Well, I want to just underlining that point. The gentle bridge to healing is often provided by a gentle and compassionate practitioner, much like yourself. And that for me speaks to the importance of getting around the right teachers, the right mentors, the right healers, the right doctors, people who can literally nurture you into the sort of energetic resonance of health. And for me, it wasn't, more accurately, it wasn't Kundalini Yoga. It was Kundalini Yoga as presented by my teacher, Guru Prem, who was basically, when I met him, my experience of him was that he was compassion and love embodied in a human being. I'd never felt anything like it. just to be sitting across from this man who was telling me about Kundalini yoga and telling me about my breath and all this. The techniques and the postures and the breath and the movement was very important. But without the love and the compassion and the understanding and the patience, I don't know that it would have been as healing. Does this make sense?
100%, Tommy. You're right on the point, man. Is that, these wounds, these traumas, 99% of the time, they've happened in relationship and through relationship. Your story with your dad's a perfect example. The person in the bathroom was also a relationship, right? And to think that we can do it on our own, to think if we just meditate enough, if we do enough yoga, if we sit on top of the mountain alone, I'm going to find nirvana. Yeah, you can find a smaller version of it, but to really heal these things, it has to happen through relationship. And I've noticed a theme in your writings that you share so often in your newsletters and your email list is community. And I would also add to not only Guru Prem's embodied compassion, but also the community element of it. And I love that you reemphasize that over and over again, because that element of being able to feel safe in a community, to feel accepted in a community, that does wonders for our nervous system right away. It repairs all of the wounds from our family of origin or from bullying or whatever it is, And
thank you so much. I'm thinking about the sort of, I don't know if you could call it standard, but let's just say the disease model of addiction, the perspective of it as a dis-ease or a disease. Can you tell me a little bit about your position on that?
Yeah, I don't like to state one way or the other whether I believe it's a disease or not, because I find it's almost like getting into politics. It brings up anger. It brings up, well, it is and isn't. I actually don't care what language you use. All I care is that you don't use that as a cop-out. That's the challenge I have with people that do see disease model. It's a cop-out. I have this. I'm screwed. That's all I can do is pray. Yes, prayer is great. And if we're not proactive, if we're not looking at the resolution of the roots, so the way I feel most authentic expressing it is I look at addiction as a coping mechanism. It's a negative symptom of imbalances in the nervous system, just the same way that there are many other diseases in the medical world that are also just negative symptoms of imbalances in the nervous system. And I actually believe, I know this is specifically addiction, but I think in the mental health world too, a lot of stuff is actually originating in trauma that gets looked over and then just diagnosed otherwise. So, call it a disease, call it a dis-ease. I'm not going to fight you on it. I just want you to wake up and start to look deeper inwards as to why am I susceptible. Every person that ever drinks alcohol does not become an alcoholic or continue to drink it for the rest of their lives. Same thing with coke, heroin, everything. Many people try these things and say, nope, or they regulate it. And there's a reason why someone's susceptible and then can end up with that label of being an addict. It's not just a curse.
And what is that reason?
The reason is what we've been talking about this last 30 minutes here, is that there are traumas in the body, whether it is, and oftentimes the hardest shells to crack are the people that don't have overt big T trauma. I had a great childhood. I had a house, I had a family, nobody beat me.
Yeah.
Oh, but now that I dig deeper, I realize Dad pressured me to be the best son ever, and that pressure built up on me to the time I was 21. I couldn't take it anymore, and now I'm drinking every night, or whatever it is, right? So it's for all of us, Tommy.
Thank you. I just want to get your perspective on food for a moment. Can a person's diet as a child be a traumatic experience unto itself?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I would say that it's an easier one to adjust and to bring healing to as an adult than it is the psychological traumas. But yeah, if kids are being fed corn syrup and starch and white bread all the time, that's going to limit their nervous system. That's going to actually kind of make their brain a little more squishy and corn syrupy. So yeah, I mean, parents being conscious of what they're putting in their kids and what they're putting in themselves will impact the nervous system and therefore trauma.
Do you? So that's coming right out of my experiences. Was one of my traumas of my childhood was my attempt to deal with trauma was traumatic. My relationship with food was so dreadful and challenging, even as an adult, actually, for me to release some of those behaviors. Sugar addiction being a big one. I do feel sugar is the gateway drug. I know for a fact that it weakens the human body. You just spoke of its impact on the human nervous system. So is the point then, Jesse, just simply to essentially, are we healing? We're healing the human nervous system on a path of recovery. That's what we're doing, and that's when a person can come back to a sensate experience of peace.
Yes, yes, and that to be bilingual about it, that's the clinical side. It's very much about rebalancing the nervous system, adding resistance and expanding the window of tolerance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. To be bilingual about it, it is also, I do believe, as I believe you do too, it is a soul journey. It is more than really, we are more than just a nervous system. We are consciousness, we are spirit, we are more than that. And yes, especially with addiction, so far in all the work I've done on myself and thousands of clients now, whenever I help them get their nervous system rebalanced, the negative symptoms fall away. They're not pushed away, they're not fought. That's another big thing. I'm sure you hear this too, is like, oh, I got to battle addiction. No, you don't. You got to understand it. And actually, you got to actually, crazy as it sounds, love it, because this is your best shot you've been doing at trying to love yourself. Right? And so I also will challenge people when they say they're in a battle. I'm like, okay, I get it. That's probably your mother or your father talking through you, but or your ancestors or your culture or something. But yeah, it's fascinating, man, to just watch people transform when they get their nervous system rebalanced.
Yes. Yes. Do you deal with many people who have chosen, or for whatever reason ended up on the 12-step path?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Even though I know at Passages, we tended to get people that were more anti-AA. Here in Toronto, we work with both tribes. We work with AA devotees and people that don't care for AA. The way I look at it is that AA is a wonderful beginning stages of recovery. It's a wonderful way to start the process. The main limitation that I see from the AA model is that it is primarily, if not completely, left brain. It is all cognitively based. There's nothing in traditional AA model that talks about your nervous system or about trauma or about, much less actually knowing how to work with it. So I look at, if I meet somebody and they tell me they've already worked the steps, I say, awesome. Now, welcome to grad school. We're going to do the deeper work.
Yep.
We're going to help you graduate to steps 13 and above. And if I meet somebody that doesn't like the 12 steps, I say, no problem. And then usually I end up asking them a lot of the same questions and they do the same work, but I just don't call it 12 steps. Looking at resentments, looking at regrets and things like that. These are important. But if that's all you do, there's also a common theme of cigarettes, coffee, donuts, sugar in general, like you named. We get off of Coke or alcohol, we pick up all these other less harmful addictions.
Yes.
One other real quick point on that, Tommy, I love this metaphor, is that I believe there's a scale in this hand, call this the amount of emotional pain, and or you could see this as the amount of trauma that I'm carrying in my body, that will be directly congruent with the amount of destruction, the amount of dysfunction, the amount of hurting myself. So if I can alleviate this, that will also go down, which would be going from Coke to coffee. And is coffee really going to kill you right away? No, but drinking it all the time does damage our nervous system, right? But it's a lesser evil. So that's how I work with people, is more about the quality of their life and continuing to heal those traumas, balance the nervous system. The patterns of self-destruction will go down as that balance comes in.
Thank you. I deal with a lot of young men in recovery. By young, I mean basically in their 20s, some in their 30s, and that's young to me now. And a lot of these guys are, really hitting the caffeine super, super hard. I mean, in a way that you can't, the normal person couldn't imagine, drinking, 2 or 3 triple espressos in the morning, and then there's like the monster drinks and the Red Bull, and really going after it. And they'll say to me, I don't feel well. And I'll say, well, you shouldn't feel well. There's no way that you would feel well behaving like that. This is going to have an effect on your experience. So, of course, you're not going to die from caffeine consumption, but as a human being on the path of recovery, the move is towards greater ease. And this is not creating greater ease in the body-mind system. This is further dysregulation. So to me, I try to make the connection for them that this is a precursor behavior, or could be a precursor behavior to relapse. Because I'm just trying to help you to create ease in your mind and body. Because I know if you have ease in your mind and body, that's going to be a good thing. Does that language make sense for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's just another way of reiterating what I just said. It's a lesser evil. Is it the fullest or optimal manifestation of someone's highest self? Probably not. And if we're still engaged in those things often, it's nothing. There's no judgment that needs to be cast. It's simply acknowledging, okay, there's still this underlying anxiety. There's still some traumas I haven't resolved. I need to be with them more compassionately. And listening to you, it reminds me of another favorite saying of mine, that a true path of recovery becomes the path of discovery. So it no longer simply becomes, initially it's about, let me get clean, let me recover. But if we're really in this, it's not just about recovering, it's about discovering. And the recovery opens up the discovery. And that's where we can really get to a place where I witness you, man, where it's, just in a space of you've taken recovery to a whole nother level, hence 2.0. Very clever.
Thank you, Jesse. How do you or do you come across people who are more on a religious approach? In my world, it's so funny because I'm in California. Everybody's more spiritual, less religious. That's just simply to say I don't walk in religious circles. Yeah. But I have such a great appreciation of people who walk in those circles, especially when they come to their doctrine, be that the Bible or the Talmud or the Quran or another doctrine. They come to the truth of it through a spiritual inquiry. That is a very attractive to me. However, in my work, I come upon people mostly who are religiously prejudiced. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it gets in the way of the spiritual experience. And I believe in the spiritual experience. I believe that's actually something that's necessary. That's difficult to explain to in your bilingual to the other folks who are more interested in science and spirit. Totally get it.
Well, I do have a comment on that.
I want to hear.
Okay, great. I mean, first of all, I would say when I do meet someone that has a religious orientation, I smile, regardless of how I feel about that religion, because there's an element of faith that now exists in that person. Mm-hmm. And, for me, and the way I can be bilingual around it is if we could use spirituality and faith synonymously, and faith not having to be in a deity or even a greater power, but faith that there is interconnectedness of all things. Faith that the way that my thoughts and attitudes and beliefs are that a way that I hold those things will impact my immediate world around me and the larger world. And so it's one of my ambitions to find a way at current, there is research out there to show what happens in the human brain when faith is active. In short, for a short interview today, to nutshell it, faith expands brain potential. Faith opens up the pineal gland. Faith allows more bihemispheric brain activity. When the attitude or energy of faith is taken on, much more happens neurologically than when we are attached to an identity as an atheist or a non-believer. Again, there is constriction and contraction. What happens with that, because it's a big screaming, no, I won't believe it. So with that yes comes more opening. And so I agree with you. I do think whether we want to call it faith or the spiritual element, it's a key in truly recovery discovery process. And I would even argue that it's a key in really manifesting what we want to create in our life, regardless of if drugs and alcohol are involved or not.
It's a critical piece of my recovery. I can't.
Me too.
I can't say enough. I went from a person who could not imagine a day without drugs and alcohol to a person who couldn't imagine a day with drugs and alcohol in it. Now that's a profound change in the way a person thinks. Yeah. And I think that for that reason, I would say that I'm an example of victory on the path of recovery from drug addiction. That there's been a victory here, a change. And I believe that we need examples of victory which feed and support our faith. The faith can't be from nowhere.
Yeah.
We have to see that there's a change that's possible. Can you speak to what you've seen in your work? Some of the stories, some of the people that have healed from very dark places to extraordinary light. Can you talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I won't be using any names, but I can just speak to, in echoing what you just said, Tommy. It is one of the most empowering and beautiful things to witness, to see someone turn from being engaged in a darker, heavier, more painful part of themselves into the lighter and healing parts of themselves. And especially at Passages in Malibu, I saw a lot of quick transformation in the 30 to 60 day inpatient bubble that would happen. What I'm loving about what's happening in Toronto now, I've been here 2 years, and because we're not an inpatient place, we're a healing center, we do have affiliations with sober living houses and such that we can makeshift something, but it's getting to see in the long trajectory of people's lives over years, witnessing these changes. It inspires everyone else that's there. It inspires me. It inspires the world around us. And in fact, yesterday I was asked to go onto this TV station here, and actually had a client that volunteered to come with me and represent the work she's been doing. And it was so touching to be there as the professional, but to also have the person that's right there coming out of the trenches there, and to see what it did for her, to get that recognition. It was just, it's so inspiring, man. And you're right, the faith can't just be blind. It's got to be based in, meeting someone like yourself, or however it happens,
Thank you, Jesse. I want to ask you about your perspective on the dilemma. One of the dilemmas I find that people face on a path of recovery from trauma or from addiction is a dilemma with time. The way I would position it for this interview is to say that with trauma, if we're affected by trauma, I would say we're affected by the past. That we're holding on to, quite literally, as we've discussed, something from the past. Our mind may project to past events, or it could project forward with anxiety or worry or concern or fear.
Putting the past on the future.
Right.
Right.
How do you view the pathway to the present moment? If I were to say, I feel that the development of presence is one of the most important things on the path of recovery, and also one of the greatest gifts of being on the path, is to find presence. We literally can't do it. It's like what you said earlier. Oh, well, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop doing drugs? Yeah. Why don't you just be better? Yeah. Well, that's because I'm stuck.
Right.
I don't realize it, but, if you said to me 25 years ago when I first got sober, hey, why don't you sit down for an hour in meditation? Just sit still for an hour.
Right.
I mean, it's not only is it not going to happen, I think I get through 3 minutes and never come back.
Yeah.
So how do you look at time? How do you help a person to find presence?
Great. I believe that the answer has been embedded in a lot of what we've already said, Tommy, because when we come back to this lens of trauma, which is the main topic here, the left brain in the human skull, it is the part that orients to time. The right brain does not. The right brain does not know space or time, and all these traumas are held in the right brain. They're held in the right brain through the sensory motor nervous system. And so when we actually help a person start to reprocess that trauma, and that's again why the 12 steps are a great starting point, but they don't touch the right brain, so they're not going to actually heal the traumas. They could bring awareness to them, which is the first step. When the right brain actually reprocesses it, it changes, and that information is taken over to the left brain. It changes the left brain's relationship, and the left brain, think ego, changes the ego's relationship to that experience. Thereby, the only reason the past is so powerful is because it's so painful. And when we take away the relationship or the association of pain, the past is just the past. And the present is more accessible, and the future is going to be what it's going to be. So again, to remind ourselves neuroscientifically, the only place time is existing is left brain. So if we are finding ourselves struggling to be in the present, It simply means we've got right hemispheric content that is essentially a wild man rattling his cage with the left brain trying to just be good and function in a normal way, but it's virtually impossible to do it, at least not with a lot of constriction and what I call character structure, creating a structure that is this character. I'm a high-functioning lawyer. I don't, I get everything done on time, blah, 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 but underneath, in my right brain, there's all this unrest. Does that?
Yeah, that helps a lot. I know we've spoken about it, but can you tell me some more about activating or accessing that right brain? Releasing the beauty and the magic of the right brain.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not. I do admit it's a gift, it's a skill set, and I think the only way we can learn how to share it with others is by practicing it ourselves. And this is why, again, things like EMDR and the somatic work, it's all about creating bihemispheric brain activity. And there are a number of ways that can happen, and it's going to be different for different people, and even on different days. Sounds, music, dance, movement, breath. EMDR uses tappers, a little bit of electric impulses back and forth, left side, right side, left side, right side. There's got to be some way, some people, and someone like yourself now that is well practiced in yoga, you will have a lot easier time getting into your right brain than someone, for example, that's a lawyer or a medical doctor who lives their whole life in their left brain. So it's basically through the arts, through the things that have been slowly but surely suppressed over the last 100 years of humanity that were much more honored and respected and revered in ancient times and are still so in indigenous cultures currently. So it's about finding a way, and that's honestly the biggest challenge for me as a psychotherapist and psychologist, is navigating each client in their own unique way as to how to help them tap into the right brain to bring that information back into consciousness.
Yes, thank you. This is going to be a good place to jump into what your feelings are about sound, music, and vibration.
Great.
And
yeah.
Music therapy. I had my own version of music therapy through the Grateful Dead. Super grateful for that experience. But I'd love to hear what you've discovered and what you're seeing that works in your work.
Absolutely. The main form of music therapy that I use and what we use at Helix is sound therapy, which means using specifically tuned instruments, most of them a little more indigenous, the didgeridoo, flute, crystal bowls, drums, like a buffalo drum. But in short, you can do it with Grateful Dead. You can do it with David Bowie. All that matters is paying attention to the way the music, which is just vibration, is impacting our nervous system. The difference between, say, just enjoying a nice Grateful Dead tunes in your ears and meditating versus what we might do. For example, I would guide someone inwards, help them find where that anxiety is living in their body. Let's say it's the solar plexus, a common place, diaphragm muscle. Have them go there. Well, I just know it's there, but I can't really get anything. I don't know. All right, and I'll just give them a little bit of mindfulness, and then I'll bring the didgeridoo in, play right on that spot, and lo and behold, all of a sudden they have a flashback of a memory, or they now can connect to that part of themselves, right? That's not going to work for every client. Another client, it might be the bowls. Another client, it might be, just holding focused attention there longer. Another one, I might have them do a breath of fire, Kundalini style, but it's using these quote-unquote alternative, which are actually more, I would call them original. They're from the long time ago in human history. These original forms of moving energy in the body system. I think of myself a little bit like Batman. I've got my utility belt. Sometimes I need the batarang, sometimes I need the bat claw, but one way or the other, I'm gonna help them tap into that in a way that is also respectful to them and that doesn't push them. I call it delicious discomfort. Just uncomfortable enough to know that we're getting somewhere, but not so uncomfortable that they are now dysregulating or going into panic attack or something like that, right? So it's, but yeah, this is what I did my dissertation research on, was looking at how, especially around anxiety, and there's so much research out there that shows that anywhere from, Grateful Dead to classical music to the sound therapies, very effective in treating anxiety and depression. But it's, with the trauma, using sound or movement with trauma resolution is a more acute and focused way of using these kind of generalized, everybody just sit there and listen to music for 30 minutes and do a pre and post test heart rate measurement and, state trait anxiety test. No, this is like using those instruments, those vehicles, to help people access the right brain material that they have spent usually decades building a fortress around.
Well, needless to say, from personal experience, I'm absolutely a believer. And in all seriousness, I've had some sound experiences in recovery that I also found to be, in a beautiful way and in an amazing way, altering of my consciousness. So what I would refer to as a natural high.
Yes.
And I say to people, and I want to get your perspective on this, I jokingly will say, I'm a little provocative at times, and I say, I try to get high every day. And I do actually mean that. Of course, the ways that I'm getting high in recovery are things like taking a walk in nature, hugging my wife, having a connection with a dear friend, eating a really healthy meal, yoga, meditation, et cetera, dancing, singing, praying. These are the ways that I get high today. But I hold to the theory that I actually believe the human brain loves to experience altered consciousness. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I would argue you're correct with that. Also, neuroscientifically speaking, one also I like to be a little provocative as well. Say, you've got the best damn drug dealer in the world right on speed dial. His name's your brain, and he can deliver any of those things that you've been craving and getting through your other, human dealers. And the same way, for sound therapy, we'll often describe it as sober tripping. And it's amazing, and people begin to understand that after a few sessions. Wow, the more I can use my skills that I'm learning here, mindfulness, meditation, whatever it is, the more I can open up my brain body, and I can have these amazing experiences that I thought were only possible on drugs. And I think it's such a great point, because I do agree. I don't think that as we are created, we're not meant to just become cubicle-based robots, 9 to 5, traffic in, traffic out, kids, blah, blah, blah. Again, look back in human history. Without needing drugs and alcohol, there were always ceremonies in the ancient cultures that involved dancing, chanting, singing, movement, breath, aliveness that create ecstatic states. And it's a more full experience of being human, and it's a more wise use of your brain and your nervous system. Well,
I think the kids have it best. We're going out to all these live music festivals, having these experiences. Unfortunately, they're sort of intertwined with the experience of drugs and alcohol. That there isn't necessarily, not too many experiences. There's some, certainly, but there does seem to be this hand in hand of like, oh, you're going to this festival, this concert. Yeah, dude, we're going to get high, whatever it is. It's unfortunate as of yet that we're not yet looking at the concept of getting high in a broader kind of way that doesn't include drugs and alcohol. I guess it's also unfortunate that we're not looking at healing from things in a broader perspective as well, which is what this is all about. So
yeah, I agree, man. And it's, there is a movement forwards. Even in my last 10 years, I was in LA for about 10 years there, I did notice, and here in Toronto too, there are ecstatic dance groups and sound and dance movement things that are completely drug-free. In fact, they're using things like wheatgrass shots and cacao niblets and, very natural, healthy ways of accessing a lot of the same parts of our brain that cocaine or pot or whatever it would. So I agree with you. We're still not there yet, and slowly but surely we're getting there.
Yes,
and the reality is, again, the same way, these kids, even if they're not labeling themselves as addicts or whatever it is, there's a reason that they're, looking to these drugs and in conjunction with these festivals. Not only is it prescribed, is it assumed that's what's going to happen, but there's a cultural phenomenon. Dr. Gabor Mate is writing about this right now in his new book, about what's happening at a cultural level, that the toxicity that we constantly imprint on our young generations. And, it's just, it's a bigger movement. And look what's happening. Your format here is growing every year, and Helix here in Toronto is growing, and Dr. Mate's work is just going off the charts. I mean, and there's many others I'm not naming right now. It is an exciting time to be alive, and an exciting time to be part of this movement.
Jesse, before we go, do you have any comments, any things that you'd like to share with the people who are watching today?
I do, Tommy. Thank you. I want to go back to early in our interview. You referred to yourself as a freak, or as that's how you're perceived. And I just want to name that, first of all, if you are one, you're a very beautiful freak. But I don't see it that way. And the only way in which I would see it that way is if we use freak in synonymous with weird, which I am often referred to as weird. And I just want to remind all of us and the viewers there that if we actually, again, inform ourselves, do a little research, look at the root words, the roots of the word weird, it actually started as a synonym for truth, and it also has to do with destiny. And initially, that's how the word was used in human history. So I will call you weird, and I will call me weird in the idea that I recognize what we're promoting is radical, and we are bringing new stuff to the surface here. But if anyone's finding themselves judging us as weird, I think it's just because we're onto a deeper truth, and we're connecting to a larger part of destiny about human consciousness awakening. So thank you for being a wonderfully weird man.
It's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure. Well, Jesse, thank you for lending your voice to the Recovery 2.0 conference. Can people find you on the web? Can you direct them where they could find some of your work?
Absolutely, yeah. The best place to find me right now is www.helixhealthcaregroup.com. I also have a private website called Hanson Healing, Hanson, hansonhealing.com. Those are the best places to find me and learn more about the work that I'm doing. Thank you so much, Tommy Rosen.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Jesse Hanson. We'll see you down the road.
All right. Be well, brother.
Be well.